Hello, I'm Dr. Glenn Godenho and I'm a lecturer in Egyptology at the University of Manchester. In this lecture, I'll introduce you to an individual named Ankhtifi. Ankhtifi was a warlord who lived in the First Intermediate Period. That's around 2100 BCE. Here you can see Ankhtifi standing in his tomb. His broad collar, staff and sceptre identify him as a high-ranking individual. This was a time during which there was no single king of Egypt. Instead, the country was fragmented, with different local rulers attempting to claim the throne. We know about Ankhtifi thanks to his large and well-decorated tomb. His tomb, particularly his long hieroglyphic inscription, is one of the main sources of information for the events that took place during the First Intermediate Period. Here you can see the interior of the tomb of Ankhtifi. At some point in the past, the roof collapsed, damaging the interior of the tomb. It was cleared and a modern roof put in place early in the 20th century. Although the tomb has clearly suffered damage, much of the rich decoration and hieroglyphic text still remains for us. Ankhtifi lived and died at a place called Hefat, which is an ancient Egyptian town. It's 50 kilometres or 30 miles south of modern Luxor. We're not sure exactly where Hefat was, but presumably it lay fairly near to Ankhtifi's tomb. This image looks out from the tomb towards the River Nile and beyond. Ankhtifi tells us that he rules over a large area in southern Egypt, from just south of Luxor down to Egypt's southern border at Elephantine, near modern Aswan. He also tells us that his nearest neighbours are his biggest enemies, the Thebans. Ankhtifi's inscription describes his battles with the Thebans, with each side attempting to dislodge the other and reunify the land under a single king. He tells us, for example, and you can read this in the translation shown on the screen, "I moved north and moored on the east of Thebes. Its walls were besieged. It had bolted its gates through fear. This faithful body of troops of mine became seekers throughout the west and the east of Thebes, but no one dared to come out through fear." Ankhtifi refers to his trusted troops fairly frequently. These troops are also depicted in his tomb, carrying bows and arrows, with their hunting dogs. Interestingly, archaeological evidence further bolsters the picture. The Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt, along with the University of Liverpool, UK, have been working at the tomb and have discovered a fragment of bow in the forecourt of Ankhtifi's tomb. This was most likely left there as a result of tomb robbery in ancient times. Note how it matches the style of the bow painted inside the tomb rather well. The long bows made from a single piece of wood appear to be the self-bow type. And the fact that the warriors are holding arrows agrees with what we know about quivers not being used until a little later in the Middle Kingdom. Now, unfortunately for Ankhtifi, he doesn't manage to ultimately defeat the Thebans and reunify the country. We know this because eventually we see strong evidence from the Thebans to show that one of their rulers, Nebheptre Montuhotep II, finally defeated his enemies to become the first king of the Middle Kingdom. It's from this point in Egyptian history that Thebes becomes a really important and prominent city, as it remained for the duration of pharaonic history. This is clearly seen in the way in which it was embellished by kings over the centuries, resulting in the complex temples and busy cemeteries that can still be seen today. It's interesting to consider how different Egypt might have looked if someone like Ankhtifi had reunified the land. As well as the battles with the Thebans, Ankhtifi tells us how important he was for his local community. A clear example of this is his famine inscription. He says, "All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger, with people eating their own children, but I never let anyone die of hunger in this nome." Rather than seeing this as evidence for a devastating drought that led to cannibalism, scholars consider that Ankhtifi is taking the common issue of food shortage and exaggerating it somewhat in order to demonstrate how efficient he was as a leader, never letting his townspeople go without food no matter how bad things were elsewhere. This highlights an interesting point. These tomb inscriptions are not straightforward histories. The ancient Egyptians were not recording events for us historians to learn about. They were recording events for the specific purpose of demonstrating how valuable they were to their communities and their gods. It was the ancient Egyptian belief that if they'd lived a good and just life, they would be worthy to receive an afterlife where they would continue to live for eternity. Ankhtifi takes this purpose quite far, and we might consider some of what he says to be quite boastful. For example, he says, "I am the beginning of men and the end of men, for my like shall not be, nor could he ever be. My like has not been born, nor could he ever have been born." I'll leave you with an image of Ankhtifi fishing from his tomb. Although the scene itself is quite damaged, note the fantastic use of colour and imagine how splendid this tomb would have been in its heyday. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.